Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So this is the part 2 of the previous pattern tutorial I posted. You can see how the dress is looking. It's looking so nice and so good. So please guys, if you've not, before you watch this, please ensure you've watched the part 1. I'll be leaving a link to that below. So let's get into it. So first off, before we start, I'm going to be making one tiny adjustment to the pattern. So on your side front pattern, the part we wrote side front, you're going to be measuring half an inch downwards. Half an inch, starting from the edge of the shoulder, half an inch down. And you're going to just slant that. Do you see what I'm doing? Just like that, exactly like that. You're going to be doing this to the side front and also to the side back. So I'll cut that off, and I'm also going to do the same thing to the back. So just like the front, I'm going to also be measuring half inch again. Remember, on the inside, not the outside, not the part that has the armhole, the inner part of the neck. So from the shoulder, take half an inch. And you're also going to blend that into the shoulder line. This is just to give a firmer fit at the front, or at the neckline rather, so it's not gaping. So I'm just going to cut that out. And that's pretty much the only adjustment we're going to make into the pattern. So next I'm going to be explaining my cut pieces. I'm using a crepe, solid crepe, or just a solid plain fabric, whatever you can lay your hands on, but solid, nothing with a stretch, or maybe just a tiny bit of a stretch. So this is the side front. You can see I cut my lining piece. Can you see my facing piece? I'm showing you the facing. Exactly the way I explained in the pattern video. So I have half an inch at the part I'll be joining, and 1 inch on the side, half inch at the shoulder, and 1 inch at the hem. So next up, I'm showing you my center front. Do you see it's not cut on fold? There's going to be a seam at the front, which was what I was planning before in the pattern. I have half an inch for that part that will have a seam, and half an inch at the side that will be joining to the side front. Half an inch at the top and 1 inch at the hem. So this is you can see the facing parts. That's what I'm showing you. Remember, I explained how to cut that in the pattern tutorial. So that was the facing I was just showing. So next up is my my center back. So I'm going to be having a zipper at the center. So I have 1 inch on that center back, half inch at the sides. Guys, whatever part you'll be joining to the other part, put half inch. But on the main sides of your dress, you can use 1 inch. So that's like any part that will be joining to another part, I'm going to be using half an inch, so it's not bulky. I have half an inch at the top. You can see my facing, and I also have 1 inch at the hem. So I pretty much did the same thing for also the side of the back. Half inch at the joining part, half inch at the neckline, half inch at the armhole, 1 inch on the side, and 1 inch at the hem. You can see my pockets. I have 4 pieces. Guys, for every piece that I've showed you, please, I cut 2 pieces. So I hope you remember that. For the pocket, I cut 4 pieces. So you can see my pocket. I do not have any allowance because I already have my allowance on the pattern. So this is my button placket for the fake button placket that we'll be sewing on. I showed you how to cut this in the previous pattern tutorial. So this is just everything. So let's get started. So first off, I'm making notches on the waist. So I'm just making marks there before I cut it. I'm also going to be making notches at the hip. So if you follow me, you know I already do this. So I'll do this to all the pieces that has waist that has waist and hip visible. I'll make notches there. So when I'm sewing, it will be easier for me. So I'm just making small cuts. That's what I mean by notches. Just so when I'm joining the pieces together, it will be easy for me to know. I'm going to be doing that to every piece that has the waist and hip. So now I'm just pinning this together because I'm going to be joining my center seam. So I'm going to be pinning the center front, the seam at the center, and I'll sew that down. So before I start sewing the main piece, I decided to sew on the facing piece first, so that I can do that down and keep it aside. So the first thing I did was bring out the piece on the center and then the one on the side. So I'm just marking chalk on the wrong side, so I know that that's the wrong side. So I'm going to only be joining the facing first, just so I can keep that aside before I get into the main piece. So I'm placing the center front facing on the piece so I can know where the up is and the down and the sides. I should have done that before I moved it from the main one. So I'm just marking that. You can see I've pinned it down at the center. This is the side of the front. You can see it's 2 pieces. So I'm just placing the original one on top of the facing. The reason I'm doing this is so I can you see that line? That line on the neck here, that part where the neck ends. I'm going to be making a notch there. I should have done that before I removed my pin. So please do yours before you separate it from the main piece. I'm just making a notch so when I'm sewing, I know that that's where my neckline ends. So I'm going to keep that aside and I'm going to pin this onto the main piece. So before I start pinning together, you remember there's the 1/2 inch allowance on top of this. So I'm marking out that 1/2 inch allowance first. And then when I'm pinning, I'm going to pin that notch I made on the neck. I'll pin it on top of that 1/2 inch. Exactly on that 1/2 inch line. So I'm just going to pin all the way down. So after doing that, I'm going to do the same thing onto the left side. So I'm just keeping that aside. So next thing, I'm making notches on my waist, on my hip, as I did to the center front piece. This is the side front. So I'm going to be pinning this onto my center front. So I'm just bringing my center front piece. I'm going to be laying that flat. Remember, I've not sewed the center seam. I'm going to join all of those at once, but I'm just pinning them down so you understand what I'm going to sew when I come back. So I'm going to be pinning waist to waist. Remember, we made that notch. That's the reason why I always make notches. So please always make these notches on yours. So I'm pinning waist to waist. And then I'm going to be pinning all the way to the top. So I always like to use these notches as guidelines. So I'm going to pin all the way to the top and all the way down. So after I'm done pinning this side, I'm also going to pin onto the other side. You can see our dress already forming. So I'm going to pin all this down before I will go and sew it, and I'll come back and show you guys what it looks like. So I'm going to pin in the right side exactly the same way I pinned the left side. Remember guys, right sides facing each other. That's how you pin. So after I'm done pinning, I'll go and sew this and I'll come back and show you guys. So now I'm done joining it. This is what it's looking like. You can see it's one whole piece. So the next thing I did was to fold the sides of my button placket 1/2 inch inwards, and I ironed it flat. And I'm going to lay this on my center seam. Remember, this is a fake button placket. It's not real. It's supposed to look like, but not real. So I'm going to be placing this exactly center to center. So I'm going to be folding that into 2. I'm making a notch at the center just so I know that that's the center. I'm going to lay it. Can you see what I'm doing? At the center of, that's why I made a center seam, so I know where the exact center of my dress is. So I'm going to pin that down, and I'm going to pin this all the way to the end of the dress. So guys, please make sure it's centralized when you're pinning. Please always make sure it's centralized, or it's going to look wobbly. So after pinning that down, I'm going to sew at the 2 sides, the sides of it, 2 sides, just to hold it down. But before that, I want to pin my pockets on so that I can join all that at once. So I'm just marking the wrong sides of my pockets, so I know that those are the wrong side, because this fabric, the 2 sides tend to look alike. I'm just taking out the pins, and I'm going to be attaching my pockets onto the sides of the main dress. So I'm only going to be working with the first 2 pieces. So I'm going to be keeping the other 2 pieces outside. So as per usual, from the notch at my waistline, I'm going to measure 2.5 inches down, 2.5 inches downward. Then I'm going to put the beginning. Do you see what I'm doing? I'll place the beginning of the pocket on it. Please guys, when you're sewing your pockets, make sure right sides are facing each other. I'm just going to pin that down. So after doing that, I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. As per usual, I'll measure 2.5 inches from the waistline. And I'm also going to place the pocket down and pin. So after doing that, next thing I'm doing is marking my side allowance on the pocket. So whatever allowance you have on your side, remember that's the exact allowance you have on your pocket. So I'm marking my side, the allowance I have on the side of my dress onto the pocket. I'm going to rule that straight. I'm also going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to sew on that line down, then I'll flip it over and I'll sew on top of that just to hold it in place. So I'll do this to both sides. So I'll go and do that and sew my bottom placket on the sides. Remember guys, you're sewing on both sides of that bottom placket to keep it in place. And I'll sew the pockets and I'll come back and show you guys what it looks like. So I'm done sewing it. This is what it's looking like. You see the pockets, you see the bottom placket. Sew on both sides guys. Remember to hold it down. So this is the pocket I'm showing you up close. You can see I sewed and then I flipped it over and I sewed on top of it. So I'm going to be keeping that aside. So the next thing I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be going into my back. So this is my side back. I'm using my chalk to make markings on the wrong side just so I know that those parts are the wrong sides. I'm making notches at the waist and at the hip. Guys, at this point, if you've not subscribed, please guys, don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to give me a thumbs up. So I'm just making a notch just so I know again where the waist and the hip part are. I'm also going to be doing the same thing to the center back. Remember that the center back has a zipper at the center. So make all your notches like the way I'm doing. So after doing that, next thing I'm doing is making marks on my lining piece, on my facing piece rather, just so I know where the top is, where the side for the dart is, and where the center front for the zip is. So I'm just marking all that down. I prefer to do this when it's still attached to the main fabric than when it's on its own. So after doing that, I'm going to keep that aside. So the next thing I'm going to do is pin my center back together just so I can sew that down before I have to pull my zipper. So I'm just going to pin that all the way down. So now I'm done pinning. I'm going to take away the pins from my paper. That this was looking like. I've not sewed it. It's still pinned down. So I flipped it over. You can see what it's looking like. So I decided I'm going to do like the front. I'll just pin everything down and then I'll sew it. So this is my side back. I'm just marking the wrong sides so that I know that that's the wrong side. I'm going to keep my facing part aside. I'm making my notches at the waist and at the hip. And then I'm keeping my facing piece aside. So after doing all that, I'm going to be attaching the side pieces onto the main center back. So I'm laying right side to right side on one side of the center back. I'm going to pin that all the way down, starting at the waist. Start at the waist, I'll pin the hip, and then I'll walk all the way up and all the way down. So I'm just pinning it down. So when I'm done pinning the one side, I'm going to pin the side back onto the other side. Remember guys, I've not sewn anything. These are all pinned. So this is it. I'm going to go and join this. I'll come back and show you guys. Remember the center back, please. The part you put in your zip, remember to use a loose stitch. So this is the back. You can see it's all joined, looking neat. Next thing I'm doing is going to be installing my zipper. I'm using an invisible zipper for the seam at the center back. You can see I've also done my pockets off camera. It's exactly like the way I showed you at the front. So I'm going to go and fix my zip and come back and show you guys. As you can see, guys, I'm done installing my zipper. I've ironed out my seams to make everything lay flat. I don't know if you can see, I didn't cut off the zipper. This is the entire thing. So when I've closed it up my facing, before I'll trim off the excess of the zipper. So now next thing I'll be doing is attaching both the front and the back to close up my sides and my shoulder. So now I'm going to be placing my right side on top of my front on top of the back, and then I'll pin everything. I'll start from the notch at the waist. Remember, those are always my guidelines. I'll start pinning from the notch at the waist, and then I'll pin all the way up and also all the way down. So for the pockets, please pay attention to how I sew the pocket. You see, I'm aligning the pockets together. I'm going to be holding it down with a pin at the center. Then I'm going to make sure that the pockets are aligned. Can you see? Make sure that each one is on top of each other and is sitting exactly the same. Then secure with a pin. Then I'm going to pin all the way down on the side of the dress. I'm just going to pin that all the way down. So once I'm done pinning the down, I'm going to pin the top part of it. Remember, I'm using my waist line as a guide. So now I'm going to pin all the way up to the armhole. I'm also going to do the same thing on the other side. So now that I'm done pinning, I'm going to join the shoulder. I'm also going to close up the sides. You see my hand movement. I'm going to sew all the way around like that, up and all the way down. I'm going to do this on both sides. So I wanted to show you again. Sew down, get to your pockets, go in, come out, and come out to the dress again. So I'll go and join that and I'll come back and show you guys. I'll do the same thing to the other side. So now I'm done joining the sides. Can you see my pocket on the inside? Can you see my button placket also looking very nice on the outside? So this is the dress. The main dress is ready. I'm going to get into the lining piece now. So I'm going to be joining the lining piece exactly the same way that I did the main piece, as if it's a full dress, but just that it's a piece of it. So that's my center front. I'm going to be attaching my side front to it, and I'm also going to do the same thing to the back. So it's pretty much everything you did to your main dress you're doing to your lining piece. So as you can see, I'm just assembling it side back to center back, and then side front to side front, exactly like we joined the main dress. I'm going to close it up at the sides exactly like I did to the main dress. I'm also going to close it up at the shoulder. So I'll go and sew that up. So I'm done sewing it. As you can see, I've pinned it onto my main dress, right sides facing each other. I make sure that each and every seam aligns with their exact identical seam. Can you see the shoulder is aligned with the shoulder? And I'm going to start with the neck. I'm going to sew the neck inward. Your shoulder seam, please make sure you open it up so that they are flat against each other and it's not bulky. You see, I've pinned it all the way to the back. Guys, I only pinned the neck part. I didn't pin the armhole, just the neck part. So I'm going to sew that straight, just the neck, and I'll come back and show you. So I'm done joining the neck. Can you see what it's looking? I also did a top stitch. Guys, I hope you know what a top stitch is. You push, you sew on top of your lining piece from the inside so that it holds your lining in place and it's not coming out at the front. So that's what I did. If you guys want to see a up-close video of what a top stitch is, please let me know and I'll do that. I'm just showing you my top stitch. Do you see what it's looking like? So I just top stitch. Now for the square part of the neck, make a notch there. If not, it's going to be bulky. Cut as close to the thread. Make sure you don't snip the thread. Just snip as close as possible. Just make tiny cuts there. It will make your neck sit well and it will sit perfectly. So the other parts, can you see? I'm trying to show you where the square is, where you want the exact square to show. Just cut as close. Please don't snip your thread. Don't snip your seam. Just try to get as close as possible. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just making cuts there. Can you see what I'm doing? I'm also going to make a snip at the shoulder part. where the two shoulders meet. I'm also going to do the same thing at the square part of the back. What I mean by the square part is the angle part, where your square starts to form from. So that's where I'm just snipping. I'm also doing the same thing to the other side of the back. So I'm trying to make you see this part very well, so you see what I'm doing. So when you flip it over, it's going to make your neckline sit perfectly without looking bulky or coming up. So now I'll turn this inside out so you can see what I'm trying to say. So when you iron this, it's going to lay very flat. Do you see what I'm trying to show you? Can you see that part? Yes. So when you iron that, it's going to lay very, very flat. So this is what it's looking like. So remember I told you I made snips at the shoulder seam where the two shoulders meet. I'm also making small cuts there as close to the thread as possible so that my shoulder lays flat. After doing that, I trimmed off the excess. Can you see what I'm doing? So when you snip, you trim off the excess at the shoulder. You can also trim off I wouldn't advise you to trim off the excess at the neckline part, just because that part will not be completely covered. It will be exposed so that it doesn't get as close, and in case your fabric frees, it won't rip your seam or open up that part. So I'm only cutting the shoulder part because it's going to be completely concealed inside. So I'm flipping that inside out and just showing you before I iron it. So this is what it's looking like. So the next thing I want to do is to turn my armhole inside, like to make it look neat and sewed on the inside. Now this part is quite technical. Please guys, pay attention. Do you see what I'm doing? I've turned my dress inside. Do you see? I held that and I brought it in out. So I'm going to hold those two parts, those two underarm, the seams at the side of the dress and the seam at the side of the lining piece. I'm going to start from there. I'll pin that down first. Guys, please watch this part. It's quite technical. Trying to sew this armhole inside. If you don't understand, please, you can watch that part of how I held it and I brought it inside out. So now I'm just going to keep pulling as far as I can go. Guys, please make sure you're pulling it exactly how you started. That's why I said it's quite technical. So please just pay attention. I won't rush this part so you can see. So just keep pulling and pinning until you get to the shoulder seam. So open your shoulder seam flat. If you can move a little bit after the shoulder seam, please try to move a little bit into the other side after the shoulder seam. If you can't, you can stop there. So I'm going to sew this part up to that part. Oh, in my own, I have a little bit more room to move further. So I'm going to still move further a bit. This is what I'm doing. I'm pulling the dress from the inside and trying to sew that. So I'm just pinning that down and I'm going to sew that. So guys, I'm going to start with sewing the first part that I have pinned. I was able to pin up to. I'll sew that and I'll come back and show you guys before I'll sew the other side. So now I'm done sewing. Do you see how bulky is looking? Because the almost half of a part of the dress is inside. So now when you're done sewing that first half part, I'm going to pull it out from the inside. Do you see what I'm doing? I'm just showing you the side I've sewn. And I'm showing you how far I was able to get. I was only able to get up to the shoulder. The seam on the shoulder. Or rather on the neckline. I couldn't get to the other part. I couldn't get as far as after that. So now you just pull out from the inside. You see the way I'm pulling it out? So I'm going to show you. Can you see? One side is sewed. One side is sewed up to the shoulder seam. But I couldn't sew the other side. So I'm going to do the same thing I did again. Open it from inside. And now I'm going to pin the opposite side. Just going to go with the flow of my pinning. Push out as much as I need to, continue pinning until I meet the other seam of the other side that I already sewed. I just hope this plenty English I'm speaking is making sense. But when you actually start doing it, you understand what I'm saying. I'm going to continue pulling until I see where I ended the previous seam. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just slowly pushing it out. pulling and pulling. I finally found that seam. So now I'm going to pin the entire thing, the entire side up onto that seam, and I'll close up my seam or meet it up with where the other one ends. So guys, this is just how you sew your armhole inside out. For a rounder neck, it's quite easier, but for a square neck, it's quite difficult. So that's why I'm trying to just take my time to explain this. So this is it. I'm going to pin. So before I continued, I wanted to bring out the shoulder seam I'd already sewn. Remember, we don't want to be bulky, so I'm just trimming out every excess, and I'll also make a notch at that part. I'm trimming out the excess. You see, I'm making a notch and I'm trimming out the excess. Remember, I sewed a bit across it, so I'm able to do that. But if you know you stopped exactly there, please close up your other seam first, the other side. Sew up the other side first before you do this. So now I can continue. I'll just sew that completely and I'll come back and show you. So now I'm done sewing that. I'm just making snips, or rather notches, all around, especially on the side of the dress, where the side of the dress and the side of the lining meets. I'm just trimming out every excess. The reason I'm doing this is because this will be enclosed inside and you do not want that bulk. So please trim as close to your seam as possible. I hope at this point you use really tight seam, please. So trim as close to your seam as possible. I'm also going to do the other side. You see what I'm doing? And then after doing that, I'm just going to pull out my dress. So can you see how everything is sewed on the inside and everything is looking neat? So when you just press this flat, it's going to lay completely flat. I'm going to be doing the exact same thing to the other side, but before then I wanted to show you how to close your zip. So you just flip this over your zipper. You see, just flip it over and then just sew pin it down. Just pin that down, secure with your pin, and then you sew as close to the zipper as possible. You can trim off your excess zipper now. Just sew as close to the zipper as possible. Do the same thing to the other side of the zipper. Flip over and sew down. So guys, after doing this, you sew that down, flip your lining piece over, and your dress is ready. So now I'm done sewing the zipper, covering the zipper of my facing. I'm going to trim where the both meet. You see, I'm trimming off the excess fabric where the two meets, just so when you flip it over, it lays flat. I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. Just trim it off, and that's pretty much it. And then I turn it inside out. So I'm just going to bring it out so you see. Do you see how flat my zipper is covered and concealed? So after doing that, I'm just going to zip up. You can see how the back is looking. So next thing I'm going to do is sew up my hem. So I'm just going to fold my hem into two like that. 1 and then 2, and I'll sew all around. I'll do the same thing around. And now just sew on my first buttons. After sewing your button, I wanted to show you how to keep your side lining staying flat. Do you see this part, this side part? After ironing, you flip it in and just make a seam. Just sew a stitch there. It will hold it in place. Do the same thing on the other side. Iron your dress and you're done. Please guys, don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.